Marshall, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was just going to say
because we both have
the
ADHD,
recording.
so it's like, I'm sorry,
we
I'm
had these names and we had the recording. Yes. So just generally, if you could speak to how you feel like the interplay or the overlap of neurodivergence, creativity, creative practice, how do you feel that kind of plays out for you?
Do you want to go first, Craig?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I suppose there are sort of two phases in sort of my life as a creative, and that was the time when I was writing where I had suspected my own neurodivergence, and then the time when I was writing after confirmation of everything I had always suspected. and I think the most interesting thing for me was looking at things that perhaps not seen as a hindrance, or not seeing, but seeing as the way I worked, and then sort of understanding the way I worked, and then the things, and humans always tend to look at the negative side of things, I imagine. It's like, well, why is this bit so difficult? And why is that bit so difficult? Rather than celebrating the things that are wonderful about us as creative writers, and, those, what we do particularly well as processes. And I think as, particularly since diagnosis and then embracing all said things, allowing that neurodivergence to inform writing, not be an obstacle to it, or any potential obstacles to it. And that's like a really joyous thing for me personally. And just those things are not maybe instantly obvious in the work that's produced, but certainly felt within the creativity itself. And I don't know how that works for you, Lynn, but
I think with me, I kind of had suspected for a long time, like you, that, there was something going on here. But you'd kind of learnt lots of coping strategies to deal with the things that, as you say, you saw as negatives. You saw as the things that, you just can't do them. Why can't I do them? And beating yourself up about them. But it's kind of like a constant pull, even post-diagnosis. It's that pull between the things that you're really good at as a neurodivergent person, like ideation, and always sparking different ideas and putting things together, in an odd way that people go, oh, hadn't thought of doing it like that. And, that constant excitement of chasing the shiny, shaking up all the things in that kind of snow globe and all the glitter coming down in different shapes. Capturing that is the brilliant thing about being, neurodivergent. But then having up against that the whole, okay, so how do I get all of my executive dysfunction into gear to make me be able to get across and over and clamber over that to get things done, and the many and layered, color-coded, online, digitally enhanced, on paper, in a journal, in a diary, all of the ways that I keep everything on track. Well, that's something I was kind of doing before I realized I had ADHD. So I'd learned how to do that already. And I think now the great thing is I just beat myself up less about it. I see it less as I'm crap at that. It's kind of, okay, so that's a challenge for me because of this thing. How am I going to work around that? So it's like finding that balance between the two for me, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that it is about of just making peace with the balance between things. And, and I'm autistic and ADHD, and sort of oscillate between the two, which is, and you talk about ideation and the spark of ideas, which is just wonderful. And then that kind of okay, I'm going to shut everything down and sabotage everything for the next 3 weeks and let everything just fall apart and see what happens. And that, and then, and I go, I do want to make this. That would be a nice thing if I can make this. And then that sort of oscillation between the two. And I think now you almost sort of build that into the planning.
Yes, you do. Absolutely. And it's so important to create that space for it, so that you don't end up with a bin fire, because that's not what you want. You want the things to come to fruition. And you just have to put a lot of kind of scaffolding in there to make sure that it does, and that can be organizational tools. It can be sort of, getting over that sort of, oh, it's all right, I can do that tomorrow. Procrastination is our enemy. And, we need to learn how to beat it and keep it down. And, and it's constantly that juggling and that keeping all those plates spinning. But the great thing, I have ADHD. I'm very, very dyspraxic, as anyone that comes within my, sort of oscillations will tell you. And it's kind of managing to keep everything spinning, not chase the shiny constantly. Find a place to park the shiny so you can come back to it later. Because there's always going to be a shiny, and because of that sort of desperate need for dopamine fixes and the excitement and the thrill, we have to manage that very carefully, and I regularly sort of give myself little talking tos, to make sure I am managing that and that I'm still experiencing all the joy, because everything I do in my working life, don't tell my boss, but everything I do in my working life is something I would do for nothing. I love it. I, eat, sleep, just revel in it, wriggle in it. All the dopamine is there. That's work for me. And I feel very lucky that I'm able to do that, and I think finding that thing that keeps everything firing and keeps you exciting and thrilled like a small child on a daily basis is the way to have an incredibly happy life. And that was something sort of we're often told that we can't have because, oh no, let's look at it through a negative lens. Oh no, you're a little bit broken, you don't work. No, actually, we just work differently.
That's really interesting. And I think because I suppose, writing and creativity and, and I've said writing, and I think here it is, we can look at sort of creativity in general, where, but we're coming from writing backgrounds here. But I've learnt that I'm a good collaborator. And that's something that has increasingly come to the fore, and I suppose all writing becomes a collaboration in some form with editors, publishers, and copy editors, and illustrators, and whatever, whatever form, in as much as I write for stage and particularly children's theatre, and that's another form of collaboration with directors and choreographers and movement experts and actors, and wonderful. And then I think the way that I think sort of knowing myself better than I did before is going into a writing project of knowing this is what I do and this is what I don't. If I do this, I will come unstuck.
Yeah.
By that I just mean, I have a certain tendency to say yes to everything immediately. Hence, pleased to meet you, everyone.
Here we are. Because we are golden retrievers who rush in enthusiastically. Yes.
And rush in, and then to say, actually, I can say no to things, and I can work out that there's anything that involves tremendous amount of admin of other people's timetables, I'm going to fall apart and not be able to do. So depending on what the job description is for a creative project of knowing what's what, how to deal with editors, how to say, okay, I need, if I send you an email, please can you just say received?
Yes. Yeah.
So I will not stay up all night long for days and days on end, speculating and doom prophesizing and so on. So maybe that's one way of changing practice, maybe.
No,
This
I
feels
think
like
that's a really good point. Sorry,
This feels
Mark.
like a moment to jump in because we're transitioning to one of the other questions.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Talk about.
We're also very good at that.
Yes, we're also very good at that. Let's do some transitional kinds of things here. But this is kind of leading us into discussing the idea of collaborations versus solo projects and how you feel your practice changes, what there is about it that we should touch on when you're doing solo work versus a collaboration.
Yeah. Go on.
Sorry. I absolutely love collaboration. And one of the things I was going to say that I constantly got in my mind is don't take over. Don't interrupt people. And then we both jumped in and it's like, there we go, we did it. I love collaborations because that kind of firing off other people and that kind of, expansion of your ideas and that sort of thinking outside the box. We're constantly told we think outside the box when we're in any group. It's not that we think outside the box. We haven't got a box. We left it somewhere. We forgot we had it. I don't know. The box doesn't exist because we can't see it anymore. So we're used to thinking outside the box, which makes us a great part of a team. But the challenge for me is always reining it in a bit, not being too much. And there we sort of start to veer in the old RSD, am I too much? Am I being too much? Do people think, oh dear, and backing off and feeling quite sort of anxious and overthinking and rethinking. Oh, did I offend anybody? All that kind of stuff. But that having been said, I think collaboration is my best thing because you're sort of grabbing other people's hands and you're going, come on, let's go and do this thing. How are we going to do this thing? This thing's exciting, But I do like balancing it with, being in a room in silence on my own, on that, special interest. I'm absolutely obsessed with this thing. I can't stop researching this thing, writing this thing. I'm going to do this forever until it's finished, luckily. Some of those things continue, but it's like, I don't know, there's something to be said for both. And I think you have to also think about social batteries, and sometimes when you are just literally peopled out, you're touched out, you're hugged out, it's no, please don't do this anymore. And you think, yeah, no, I need to go for, some Lynn quiet time now. Otherwise I'm going to get bitey, that sort of thing. So it's like, I love to collaborate, but I also love having always, I'd like to say our project, but we all know it's many projects on the go that you're doing yourself as well alone. I think there's a really strong need for that, but I don't know if that's any different to the sort of neurotypical population. I think we all like variety, don't we, in those terms?
Yes, that's a good point. And I suppose, like, when it comes to, because I sort of write things for of different lengths, but that doesn't mean to say, I don't know, like, but they take any longer or less time to write. So writing picture books is oddly the thing that takes them the longest to do. So a 600-word picture book, you can spend, I think, in 6 months to a year, maybe longer, just polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing, and then losing a word and then putting in a word. Now I sort of flip-flop between loving that because it allows me to obsess over every single possible word, then saying, well, what am I telling this child? You know, am I being didactic, and am I
Yes.
sort of putting my world views into this child's mind? Who am I to tell a child, go run, do what you want, children? You know,
Yes.
and then saying, well, I do need to have some sort of control, and flip-flopping sort of back between that, which is a really lovely process. And the book I'm sort of promoting at the moment, or I've had a subsequent one now since, but because of hardback, paperback sort of publications, was the book I spent the longest writing out of anything. It'd been a long project, and it was lovely. It was all mine for such a long time. And it was a really good example to me, and it was a really good exercise in giving it up and to someone else's full brutal input, and then coming back and rebuilding. And then for the first time allowing, and I love this about theatre and sort of screen, what I'm working at the moment, but of just saying, now you build it, illustrators and page designers, and now you take this. And I think that's really good for me to let go of something, and now someone else who's very talented, or hopefully to then sort of building this in my idea, and building this into a much greater thing than I could have built alone. And I think what I now have become good at is, or better at, is, as you say, having multiple, a large slate, as it were, a big list, and saying, okay, I'm going to just put that from my mind. I cannot do this. I cannot obsess about this. I will obsess, but I need to just let this go, work on the next thing, and work on the next thing. And that's been a really lovely part of solo working, is allowing myself to obsess, and allowing myself to let go, and then move on, and then making that break from the piece, where collaborative working is just great, and I'm coming from theatre particularly, because you're all on exactly the same, you're all in it together from the outset. In a lot of things I do, you're all in a room, written a script, but the script changes. Doesn't always work this way, but this is the way I've worked for the last 2 productions. You're working with the actors, seeing things happening, making tweaks here and there, no control over it, but you're kind of in it as well. It's just a big merry dance. It's a lovely sort of, I don't want to say gang, but it's, we're all as equal partners as everyone else. And I love that kind of almost reducing the role of the writer, which is awful, but that's such a lovely feeling. Everyone is as important as each other in this project, and that's a beautiful thing to be able to, for comfort, maybe.
Yeah, I liked what you said there about working on things in different lengths and kind of different forms, and we both do that, and I thought that was quite interesting. When people kind of go, oh, what do you write? And I'm like, loads of things, really, because it's everything from picture books up to sort of academic writing and everything in between, and, writing for the web and writing for newspapers and magazines. It's like anything I want to go at, really. That's what I write. Yes.
Yes, and it is. And then I suppose, I don't know, I don't want to lead on to any potential questions, but I now have that, well, what am I writing? And is this a reflection on me, with that badge? I'm a writer who is autistic. I'm not an autistic writer. And I kind of am both, but there is that, I am a writer. Full stop.
That's another one of those good transition points. Maybe if we could kind of lead on to one of the questions, because what you just said right there, Craig, is a very natural kind of jumping off point. And the idea of, I guess we could call it obligatory or compulsory representation. Seeing yourself as a writer who's autistic, an autistic writer, as somebody who myself has dealt with different identity labels attached to my writing life. Obviously, this is something I'm really interested in hearing both of you talk about.
Yeah, and I suppose I know I've just jumped in, Lynn. I've done it again, haven't I? Just jumped straight in. Good grief!
All right, I'll let you.
But I think because the book I'm publishing at the moment is a book about a hero who is autistic, and so I suppose that's the most overt. That's the most, the biggest manifestation of myself on page that I've ever done, and that was a really interesting process for me personally, because that began for the first time of almost like a manifesto before writing, as much as the beat outline or kind of a one pager and then building up from there, or a mood board, where this is, how am I representing neurodivergency? It can't represent everything in one book, because that's just really unfair. That's just bad representation. So, what do I do? What do I write, from like lived experience and so on? That was one set of things. But the other side for me now was, I want to write a really entertaining children's book.
Yeah.
But is an adventure with obstacles and peril and a little bit of anarchy. I like a little bit of anarchy in everything I do, even on writing theatre. There's always a bit that could fall apart, which I really like. And so marrying those two things together was really important to me. I'm really deeply passionate about that, and it's subsequently a really strange book to talk about because quite defensive about it, but and so on, or sort of very attached to it, and that was a change in writing for me. That was a very different thing. I'm not saying here's a story, with an inciting incident and escalating conflict and a resolution. It is that, but also what am I showing and how am I showing it, and how do I want the reader to feel, and then making sure, I think, going around full circle of saying, well, I want to write a book that's for everyone, because that's what a book is. And if people see themselves or notice, or something chimes with them, with some of the character traits or some of the behaviors, that's wonderful. There you are, you're seeing. Or if it's a way of looking through new eyes, that's great. So it's just, but at the heart of it, I was incredibly keen to have something that was appealing to everyone. Hopefully, I know it doesn't always work that way, but so I think it's a very, because of the subject matter and because of the character and because of everything, it had to bring my own neurodivergence to the fore in a way. So it was an interesting example of solo writing post diagnosis, I suppose.
And I very much agree with you there. I write quite a lot of nonfiction as well as fiction, and I'm much more overt in my nonfiction than I am in my fiction. When I'm writing fiction, like you, I want to write a good story. I think we should all be recognizing ourselves, whoever ourselves are, in the fiction we're writing, whatever our sort of positionality is, whatever we bring to the party. We want to be recognizing ourselves in characters in the fiction that we read and the films that we see, the plays that we see. I very much loathe this idea of being a sort of a mouthpiece for something, a poster person for something. It's like, I can't speak for all people with ADHD because, God, we're all different. We're like ferrets trying to get out of a box. We're all very different to each other. So my experience isn't somebody else's experience. And that's the case, I think, whether we're writing through a lens of, it's so intersectional. It's like, my gender, my sexuality, my ethnicity, my neurodivergence, everything comes together in a ball of that hopefully comes out in my writing. But I don't want to be there clashing two bin lids together going, roll up everybody, come on, read about this neurodivergent character, because it just doesn't work, you know? It's like, it's too forced. I reject that, really. And it just, it's not satisfying fiction. And I want to write things that people go, God, yeah, I love that. That one stayed with me. So, you know,
Yeah,
the lens is there, but I don't think we should always, you know, shine it to the point that it burns a hole in the paper, perhaps, is the way of looking at it, you know?
I think that's right. And what's interesting is character and things that are true. And you know, I've some of the things I write are range between the silly and the surreal and so on and so forth. But the characters are true, and they have real thoughts and real dreams and real goals and real problems. And you know, like, I was very keen to represent a sensory overload in mainstream children's picture book. And you know, and this is something I think about as we're both educators, all three of us educators, of, you know, everything sort of reflecting back into even how we set up teaching spaces and learning spaces and so on. And so, you know, that was something that I was desperate to put in, but that wasn't the story. That's you know, that's the beginning of a story, but then becomes, you know, its own thing. And being careful about labeling its behaviors and patterns, and that's what I'm interested in because, you know, labels change and so on. But humans, you know, by and large, we recognize things, you know, and think, oh my goodness, that's me.
Exactly.
So maybe certainly an increased sensitivity to what I write, and also maybe access is a thing, and accessibility. And again, I suppose coming sort of looking at it from writing for stage, it was in the last two big projects I worked on, I was very keen to think about, it's not just the words I'm writing, but how can this be experienced in an accessible way for children and families with varying needs and various triggers and so on. And you can do your best on those kind of things. And so this sort of manifested in over the project, and it was lovely collaborating with people. We all had a shared brief of, well, this could be controlled with lighting and seating, and maybe the audience can walk around, and would that matter to the play? And can we have a sound bed when people come in, so it's an inviting space? And can we put this in spaces where potentially children wouldn't normally access the arts, you know, in some of the more rural areas? We're all in Cornwall in England and so on. And I think there's that increased sensitivity, not just to story writing or art creation, but also the way that is accessed and consumed, and which, you know, if we didn't have enough things to bend our minds when writing stories, let's throw that in the mix. But it's so important, and
it is.
But knowing King, like, I'm thinking, well, so 5-6 years down the line, and do I always write these from about me? Is that always going to be in the middle of things?
Yeah.
So that's my current crossroads, and I'm writing something that's kind of dark and adult and like and horror, and so yeah, I'm working my way through that at the moment. So
I mean, that won't be about you though, Craig.
Yeah, it's the well, that's not for me to say, but no, but yeah. So what was the question? Sorry.
Well, it's probably, that's a clue. It's time to move on to the next one, actually. Like, oh, all of our thoughts just went away like all those little ferrets in a box. Because we've touched on something, actually, Lynn mentioned it earlier, and I was hoping you could expand on this a little bit. RSD, and if anyone in the audience is unfamiliar, rejection sensitive dysphoria, and that's a neurodivergent term for being really, really sensitive to rejection. Story of my life. So like, how is that for you as a writer? You know, how do you deal with that? Do you feel like you are sort of more susceptible to feelings of RSD? And if so, how do you manage the inevitable rejections that come along with the writing life?
I think with me, I've been writing for so long. I'm just so used to the fact that there'll be more rejections than not, that they kind of don't trigger my RSD. You know, I'm just like, okay, on to the next, because experience has shown me that kind of just about everything I write will find a home, because it does. And sometimes it's just not the right home. So I don't let myself, you know, I might be sort of like, oh God, I really wanted them to accept that, you know, and that does happen. There are particular, you know, publishers of the heart that you're like, damn, I really want that with them. But, you know, it finds a home somewhere else. But then you've kind of built those relationships with those people there, and you come back to them, and, you know, you do get something published with them, you know? So I don't feel like my RSD is so much triggered by that. It's more human interactions, and it may be human interactions within a workspace, you know, sort of trying to read between the lines, the tone of an editor's email, or what did they mean by that? Oh God, did I do this thing? Oh no. And trying not to obsessively email them back about it, because you're going to drive them completely, you know, to distraction. That's more where I struggle with it, really. It's the kind of overthinking and trying to interpret the human, rather than the rejection of, no, your writing was lovely, but it's not for us, or it's not for this issue, or it's, you know, doesn't fit this imprint as well as, you know, the way we want it to go, all that sort of thing for me. How about you, Craig?
Yeah, you're totally right. And I mean, this might say more about my writing than anything else, but most things I pitch don't get made. So, and I had this real run of early in my career where I'd never had anything I'd ever pitched get made. But what would happen is that I would submit things and people would say no, and then the publishing house or an editor would just say, but we are looking for this kind of book. Would you like to do that? And I go, oh yeah, great.
And you're like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
So I think it kind of, you sort of get slightly numbed by it. Although I've had some horrible rejections, which especially when a book looks like it's really going to go the distance.
Yeah.
And I do a thing, because a book I worked on for so long as a collaboration project with an artist, and it got rejected inexplicably right at the last moment. And I now give this to students as a as something that they're allowed to pull apart as a peer review. And I'm just putting it out there to say
I do that too. That's amazing. Oh,
and then somehow I just feel like that gives me once a year, that gives me a lovely little top of my skin, as it were, and so on. But however, I have never looked at anything that's written about the books, anything I've ever made. I don't look at any reviews anywhere ever. Everything is blocked and shut down.
Oh, I do, and I just think, yeah, you're wrong.
And that might just be good human practice. You know, I think that's just yeah. But I did, like, earlier in life, I used to, and because of that massive kind of inferiority potential, you know, it was not a complex. It was just, I would go into a job and feel like, how can I sit here for 8 hours? Why can't I just go and watch Homes Under the Hammer or eat a sandwich? And so on. And so what I would do was turn myself into the perfect employee, be brilliant for sort of 5 to 6 months, and then quit while I was ahead with an extreme burnout and so on. Because I just think, well, this cannot be sustainable. And actually, that's one of the things about making peace with your own self, with diagnosis and later in life, is just some things you're just not for you, because of the environment, because of structure, because of this. And I am lucky, aside from writing, to work in an environment that's very accommodating and very sensitive, and but yeah, in terms of writing, isn't it odd though, isn't it, that you just kind of just get not numb to rejections? They still sting, but that it's a rejection until proved otherwise.
It truly is. And I mean, like you were saying, I mean, I write picture books too, and I've had a couple of picture books that have, they've done really well, and the editors have absolutely loved them and taken them to acquisitions and this, that, and that. And then the money people say, oh no, but that illustration is going to be far too expensive. We can't do that, and right, okay, so there's that. But also the kind of, I don't know, dogged persistence. When I was touting One Boy's War Round, people were, well, no, it's not a picture book because it's for older readers. It's about, it's about World War One. It's far too dark. It can't be a picture book, because picture books are for, for little people, really, aren't they? Tiny little people. And at the time they kind of were. And I was like, yeah, no, but they don't have to be, do they? And it was that thinking outside the box thing. And then it found a home with Francis Lincoln, and, it's done really well and tests really well in schools. There's whole like scholastic schemes on it, because it's using images to help with the narrative in a way that a graphic novel would. But why can't a picture book do that? Well, picture books do that, even when they're picture books for littlies. So why can't we be more flexible with who they're for? And I think a lot of that comes down to marketing, really. But I'm very glad that I persisted with that. It's a book I'm very proud of, and it's something, if my RSD had kicked in and 25 publishers had already said no to it, and I'd just gone, oh well, that's not a thing, it would never have come to fruition. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, no, I'm going to keep pushing with this one. So I'm glad that the RSD didn't kick in with that.
Yeah, me too.
Me three. On that note, I think this might be a good moment to maybe have a bit of a shift in our focus and look at the questions that have come in through the chat. Otherwise, we'll still be here talking at 6 o'clock, because this is very interesting. So if I could, I think the first question that we got was just, how did neurodivergence influence you as a writer? We got that question early on, and I hope it's safe for me to say I think we might have answered it by now. So I have a suspicion that we have. Another question that's come in: do the authors write in any way for children who are undiagnosed neurodivergent? Do you?
I just write for children when I write for children, and it's not kind of, I'm aiming, you think of your audience, but I think of my audience as in kids, and kids of a particular age, and what do kids of a particular age tend to like, and, how do they experience and access the world. And the great thing about having ADHD, I think, is that the child inside is so close to the surface, just so close that you can access it so easily, that it makes writing for children of different sizes much easier, perhaps, for us. But no, I would say I don't write specifically for kids with ADHD, or I don't specifically write for people who haven't got ADHD, or who are they're in a particular box. I just write for kids, really.
I think that's really, yeah, I'd echo that completely. And the other thing is with picture books, more than anything else, this is it will be a shared experience. And picture books, unless it's, a child will pick up a picture book and sort of shuffle into a corner and as best they can. But picture books, by and large, are read to a child by, someone bigger than them, by an adult and guardian, grandparent, whatever. And one of the most interesting responses to my character was the amount I've had from mums of just going, "Oh my God, that was me." You've written about me as a child, or like that's, or it made me think about a couple of things that now kind of do add up a bit. Now I've seen a character go through this adventure. And picture books are kind of the earliest conversation starters in a way, because even though the child could read the book by themselves, they're sort of almost filtered through the adult as well. And that's great if that can happen, if that can just be some sort of empathy building exercise. That's brilliant. But can children vote with their feet, especially if you've done, like, when you do live storytelling?
Brutal.
Oh, just walk off, and they just oh dear, oh no. And that's when that need for approval really kicks in. I go, I could change, come back.
Yeah.
I could shall I dance? I don't know. So there is, but I do tend to write for all children, because that's, who knows where this book will end up.
So, thank you. Got another multi-part question here, some of which I think we've answered and some of which I think perhaps we could talk about. The first of the questions in this, have you found you've needed to cite that you're neurodivergent in cover letters to agents and publishers? Do you think it's necessary?
Don't think it's necessary. I think it's something you can say as part of who you are, as kind of, buy one, get one free. Here's an added bonus. I can bring this to the table too. So I do think it's something that you could include, but I don't think it's something you kind of have to. Yeah.
I think it's whatever you're comfortable with doing, because, and I sort of meant to say at the opening of all of this, I'm not an expert. I'm just finding my way in this, like navigating life.
Absolutely.
And this is just like my own experience, and I think it's it can be a matter of serious pride. It's like, I'm neurodivergent. This is who I am, and these are things that this is very much part of the DNA and the tapestry of who I am. But you certainly don't have to. I would if you're writing about a character or a setting. But
why am I the person to write this book? Yeah, absolutely.
I think that is, something you should definitely do.
Yeah,
in that situation.
I do find there are more calls for submissions that ask for that or ask about it. But the ending to the questions, does it give the editors, agents, whatever, greater understanding? Should the text just stand on its own? And again, I think we've spoken to that part. There was one person who asked, and I think this is for Craig, could you ask what the book's title is, please? I think this is a self-promo moment.
What this? No,
well, look, you just happen to have the book handy.
It's always it's called Gina Kaminski Saves the Wolf, and then the sequel, Gina Kaminski Rescues the Giant. So published by Little Tiger, available in all good bookshops, etc., etc. So.
Thank you very much. Another question: do you feel that neurodivergence makes you more inclined to be creative or more creative than neurotypical people?
Personally, I'm going to say no. I work with many creatives who are all fantastic. I think the viewpoint is different, and
Mhm.
you sort of come in from a different angle potentially. But I don't. I wouldn't say that was 100% true, but I do think, and again, I can only speak personally, and you mentioned this earlier, Lynn, but I think we're very good at potentially solving problems.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that more and more and more, particularly with mentoring, of just being able to say, well, this would fix that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's coming in, it's like ideation again, and it's just this finding a way of just all viewing a situation differently, maybe. I don't know, but I've just found that is a skill I never realized I had until recently. And it was interesting to hear you say it, Lynn, earlier. So, but apart from that, I think creatives are really good at their job. Like, however they.
Yeah. I mean, yes, you can be creative, whoever you are. I think sometimes some of the traits within ADHD in particular, that kind of impulsivity and the, being a risk taker, working on your gut reaction and this kind of intuition of what works can help to push you into actually, I'll run with that, and having the confidence to run with that because, I'm ridiculously overconfident anyway, so I'm going to have a go at it. And I think that kind of feeds into my creativity, both with my writing, and I also work as a textiles artist. And I know that sometimes the pieces I do use kind of weird found objects and textures and things as well, in a way that isn't necessarily what's traditionally done. And I think that kind of risk-taking behavior harnessed, if you like, can enhance creativity and make you take risks and put things together in a different way. I don't know if it makes you more creative. It just kind of makes you differently creative, I guess.
That's I'm going to write that one down. That risk-taking harnessed is such a good way of describing that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because that moment of like, well, I can do that.
Yeah.
And then, oh my goodness, I can't.
Absolutely.
But if I could, what might that look like? And then sort of going around that. That's a wonderful phrase. I love that.
It occurs to me, I'll just allow myself to jump in a tiny bit, but there's research about what creativity actually is that suggests that it's making novel connections between bits of knowledge or experience that you already have. And so it may be that part of what sets us apart, if anything does, it may not be that we're more creative particularly, but we connect the dots in different ways.
I think so. And we're not bound by what we already know. We know it, but we're like, don't know. Actually, I'm not sure if that is the thing. Just because we have this knowledge doesn't mean that we have fixed thinking about this knowledge. So that connecting the dots in the different ways really resonates with me, and my experience.
Cool. So the sand is starting to run out of the hourglass. Among the questions, there's what looks more like an observation from one of the folks in the audience, but I'm not sure there's a question that needs to be answered. And then I mean that if you've got a particular style, is that questioned?
Does that go with another question somewhere?
Yeah, but so that sounds like a follow-up to something else.
Oh, if you write in a non-traditional or experimental prose way.
Yeah, and the cover letter. Yeah, do we do anything differently? Do you do anything differently that you're aware of?
I don't quite understand the question there, really.
So if you've written something that's quite experimental, potentially, I don't want to speak on behalf of Samantha, but that seems to be if you're writing in a way that is non-traditional or experimental, would you put in a cover letter that you're neurodivergent?
I think I'd go back to exactly what I was saying before. You don't have to. The work stands on its own. it doesn't, I mean, it does matter what you put in the cover letter, but it doesn't matter what you say about yourself in the cover letter. If the work can't stand on its own and they don't think it will make money, it won't get made, whatever it is. So I'm afraid that's one of those areas where there's no correct answer. And that's where, handy, having that gut reaction and intuition makes you think, okay, sometimes we get it wrong, but, a lot of times we get it right too. I don't think we need to explain ourselves any more than anybody else, though.
Yeah.
Quite right. And it's our integrity as creatives and writers is this is the work I have created. However, if there's lived experience that really validates kind of the work you're trying to achieve, but that's sort of more contextual, I suppose. But yeah, it comes down to how you feel.
And we've just had one more question come in very quickly, because you can't send a cover letter to the public sort of thing, can you?
Exactly.
Yes, that's unfortunately. So, right, what I was trying to achieve, and now I know you don't like it. Yeah. So yeah, that's well said.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's one of the things too, just to sort of start sending this plane in for a landing. But when you teach on a creative writing course, I think one of the things that we try to do is to make the students, or help the students, or guide the students to be able to write in a way that allows their texts to stand on their own, because you can't send a cover letter to the public saying this was my intention.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
explaining it. You're not there to explain it to the readers. So I think that we have probably covered as much as we can in the time that we have. So Lynn and Craig, let me thank you again for graciously consenting to be part of our discussion this afternoon. For the folks who are with us, thank you very much for taking the time as well. And please don't forget, this is the first of 3 of these seminars that are taking place. Lania will be hosting one, Sam will be hosting one as well. And then this is actually part of a larger endeavor where we're also having a conference on neurodiversity and creativity in London later this year. So keep an eye out for that. So thanks again, and I will just quickly turn it back over to Lania to wrap things up.
Wow, that was what a treat to get to hear this conversation. Thank you so much, Lynn and Craig. Just wonderful. And the questions from the audience. And I just love listening to people talk. And Marshall, your questions were great. Thank you for that. I'm feeling inspired to go take some risks, but harness. Wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. And hopefully you can join us again next week and the week following. And maybe this summer in London when we have our big conference. Very exciting. So thanks to everyone. I'm going to stop recording now.